Today, on Rural Road Tripper, I take a tour of two of the plantations here in St. Francisville, Louisiana, one much more extravagant than the other. The opulence in which Louisiana's upper class lived in the era of these plantations is impossible to miss. But touring these properties also leaves you with a burden for how terrible life must have been here for the hundreds of slaves that worked on these plantations. Come along with me as I take a look at both plantations, as well as take you on a brief tour of St. Francisville's historic downtown area. St. Francisville's history goes back over 200 years to a time when Capuchin monks were looking for high ground to use as a burial site. A monastery was also built on a bluff here, overlooking Bayou Sara, a town that once boasted the largest port on this part of the Mississippi River. Nothing remains of Bayou Sara today. Over time, a settlement would form around this area, taking its name from the Catholic Order's forebearer, St. Francis, originally calling it the Villa of St. Francis, which I personally think sounds classier than St. Francisville. In the early 1800s, John H. Johnson began to design some street layouts for the town. By 1807, the town was established. Still known today as the town 2 miles long and 2 yards wide, due to its location atop a narrow ridge, St. Francisville continues to be a commercial and cultural center for this region of Louisiana. Many of the plantations from the town's early days are still standing, and stand as a monument to the history that occurred on their properties. Multiple are privately owned now, but there are multiple that can be toured by the public. The first plantation that I visited here was the Audubon State Historic Site, which is today a state park featuring the Oakley Plantation House and outbuildings. The first thing you see when you enter onto the property is the museum building, which is also where you pay to get onto the property, with the added option for a guided tour of the interior of the house, which I of course did. You'll see all about that in a minute. In the museum, which is quite small, you can see lots of little items that were found on the property relating back to its days as a functioning plantation. There were displays on what life was like for the families that lived in the plantation house, as well as what life was like for the slaves living and working on this property, a life that no doubt was incredibly hard and unfair. Also in the museum is a room completely dedicated to prints created by the namesake of this state park, ornithologist and artist John James Audubon, who is famous for all of his depictions of various kinds of birds and wildlife, many of which he created here on this property, as he spent the summer of 1821 living here as a tutor to the teenage daughter of the plantation's owners at that time, Eliza Puri. In his downtime, he would collect specimens, set them up artistically, and paint them for his book, The Birds of America. Leaving the museum, there is a short walkway which takes you out to the front of the plantation house, an example of Louisiana early colonial Anglo-American architecture. One of the features that hits you immediately when you look at this house is the angled slats that are on the porches. These louvers, designed at a certain angle in coordination with the rounded ceilings of the porches, known as galleries, would help to create a place cool enough to sleep in the hot summer months, as the breezes would keep the air circulating through that area. Quite a fascinating design, if you ask me. Perhaps not the most brilliant look for curb appeal, but definitely functionally useful, especially for a period long before air conditioning was ever an option. The tour of the inside of the house begins in the bedroom downstairs, where Mr. Audubon would have stayed during his time tutoring here. The room even includes some of his personal furniture and tools used from that time. The dining room, along with the rest of the interior, is designed to look as it may have appeared a little after the house was originally built in 1815. Today, it appears as it would have in the late Federal period. The house was not originally as big as it appears today, and this room would have looked somewhat less extravagant than it did in its later periods. In its original form, the entire family would have actually all slept in just one bedroom, the room which is now the upstairs room on the second floor of the house. Rooms at the back of the house used to be porches on the original structure, but at some point were closed in to create more rooms. The original slope of the floor, originally used for drainage due to being outdoors, still remains noticeable today in those back rooms. The house includes bedrooms, children's rooms, and an office space that was used during the plantation's working hours. The office includes its own staircase up to its side door from the rear of the house. The business of the plantation would have been conducted from this room. The The plantation house has very little embellishments or architectural decoration, due to predating the classic revival found in other plantations in the area, such as the next one that we will be touring in a little bit. Yet, the house, with its strong, tall presence in the property, still is a beauty, and a stunning architectural example of functional plantation houses. After a very informative tour guide led me through the house, I had a pleasant walk around the rest of the property on my own. And when I mean on my own, I mean on my own. There was not really anybody else here while I was, so I had plenty of time and space to reflect on what life was like here back in the 1800s, when the ground here would have been buzzing with people working, literally slaving away, and the people who would have been living in this house, some of the earliest residents of the St. Francisville area. In fact, the people that lived here would have a direct connection to the next plantation that I will tour, but again, more on that later. Behind the plantation house is a reconstruction of the original kitchen building, built on the original foundation and around the original fireplace, which was still standing. Also in the kitchen building is a weaving room and a workroom. Other notable things to see on the property include a blacksmith shop and a barn. There is a garden beside the house. There are also multiple slave cabins shown here on the property to show what the living conditions of the slaves would have been like. A walk into the field behind the house leads to multiple information boards, again talking about slave life and death at the Oakley Plantation, and others talking about what it took to keep the plantation operating in its early days of agriculture and farming. Also in the grounds are a picnic pavilion, modern restrooms, and plenty of parking. After touring the Audubon State Historic Park and the Oakley Plantation, I headed into town to get a bite to eat and see the historic downtown area of St. Francisville. On a Sunday afternoon, the Magnolia Cafe was incredibly busy, but oh boy, was it also an incredibly good choice for lunch. Set in quite a historic building, this cafe had charm oozing out of every corner, and the food and service were both very good as well. I had the French dip po' boy, which seems to be something that they are known for around here. Looking around town, there are some shops to look through, as well as a museum, although, I'm sure this will shock you, it wasn't open while I was in town. I'll stop talking for a few minutes and just show you some of what's here in the downtown St. Francisville area. After lunch, I headed over to the Rosedown Plantation, which is a much fancier example of a plantation from St. Francisville's plantation era. The tour of the Rosedown Plantation begins at the Visitor Center beside the parking lot. With a gift shop, a brief video with information, and the counter to pay your entrance fees, this is where it all starts. After exiting the Visitor Center, the first structure you encounter is this barn, complete with various examples of farming equipment from years gone by. Vast gardens surround the plantation home in almost every direction, with hedges and flowers and buildings of different kinds and fountains. The gardens alone are stunning, and I wasn't even visiting during the warmer months. It was downright cold outside, at least by local standards, when I was here. Stunning, stunning property. And then I saw it. Seeing this plantation house for the first time nearly took my breath away. I can't imagine a more picturesque setting for a house anywhere. The way that the oaks line the drive and the gardens surrounding and every element leading your eye into focus on this masterpiece of a house. I was about to tour this house, but I had a while to wander around before the tour began, so I looked at the other buildings around the property. I began by looking at this little building, which was the doctor's office. The family that owned the plantation hired a doctor, although he didn't live on site, to come and work here daily to treat both the family and the slaves that worked on the plantation here. There is a greenhouse here, a milk house, a woodshed, a kitchen building, as well as numerous other small buildings of various uses. There is also a wing of the house that was not original construction, that was detached from the main house and moved to become its own standalone house, now known as Miss Nina's Wing. This building doesn't appear to be open for tours. At its largest point, Rosedown Plantation had over 3,400 acres of land, most of which was planted with cotton, with about 250 slaves living at the plantation and working the fields here. Construction of the main house began in November of 1834, built with slave labor. It was completed 6 months later at a cost of over $13,000. Remember how I said that there was a direct connection between the Rosedown Plantation and the Oakley Plantation that we toured earlier? Well, the daughter of the couple that built Rosedown, Sarah Turnbull, would marry James Peary Bowman, who was from the Oakley Plantation. Together, they inherited this plantation and would end up having 10 kids of their own here. The inside of this 8,000 square foot home is perhaps even more stunning than the outside, with many elements that were quite literally ahead of their time, including having indoor showers, powered by water collection cisterns up on the roof, and a central staircase that was made entirely from one solid piece of wood, so that there are no joints or seams anywhere on the staircase. A skillfully created wood masterpiece by some of the enslaved labor that was forced to build this tremendous home. Most of the wood used in this home was milled right on site. As you walk around this house, you are overwhelmed with not only its size, but the scale of the wealth that these people must have had. The furnishings, many either original to the house or similar in style, are still stunning today, masterpieces in their own right. Included in the original belongings of the house is a tapestry made by none other than Martha Washington. I'll stop now and let you take a look around inside for a few minutes. The Rosedown Plantation was purchased in 2000 by the Louisiana Office of State Parks and is open daily for you to see what life was like living in a more fanciful setting than we saw at the Oakley Plantation this morning. Which plantation would you have preferred to visit? Both are worth a visit. In fact, the entire little town of St. Francisville is worth a visit. So much history. I could have kept finding more properties to tour. Plus, I believe there are some things to do right down in the Mississippi River, including boat rides and some unique old trees down there. If I'm ever in the area again, I will definitely be stopping in St. Francisville again. The history here may not always have been nice, especially as related to slavery, but the beauty that was created here amidst the chaos of that time still stands just as beautiful today. And the fact that I can literally walk through history is not something that I take lightly. I'll see you next time, somewhere else, down the road.